In the rolling hills of central Italy, a civilization was forged that would become the blueprint for the Western world. Legions and emperors, bread and circuses, law and engineering, triumph and betrayal. These set the foundations of our modern political and social landscape. This is the story of how a small city-state on the Tiber River grew to engulf the known world, only to fracture and fall under the weight of its own grandeur. Here are the 1,000 years of Roman glory, conquest, and collapse in 20 minutes. The Seven Kings and the birth of a republic. Before there were emperors, there were kings. According to legend, Rome was founded in 753 BCE by Romulus, a son of Mars raised by a wolf. For nearly 2.5 centuries, Rome was a monarchy, ruled by 7 successive kings, who established the city's early boundaries and religious institutions. But kingship in Rome ended in blood and scandal, when the 7th king, Tarquin the Proud, was expelled following a popular uprising. The Romans swore they would never again be ruled by a single man. In 509 BCE, the Roman Republic was born. This was a revolutionary experiment in governance. Instead of a crown, power was shared between 2 elected consuls, advised by a senate of aristocrats, and checked by assemblies of the people. This mixed constitution was designed to prevent any one individual from becoming too powerful. It created a competitive political culture where nobles vied for glory not through hereditary right, but through service to the state and success on the battlefield. The conquest of Italy and the Punic Wars. For the first few centuries of the Republic, Rome was just one of many powers in Italy. It fought grueling wars against its neighbors, the Etruscans, the Samnites, and the Latins, through a combination of military tenacity and a unique system of alliances. Rome slowly but surely unified the Italian peninsula. Unlike other conquerors, Rome often granted its defeated enemies partial citizenship, turning former foes into loyal allies who provided the manpower for Rome's next wars. By the 3rd century BCE, Rome's expansion brought it into direct conflict with the reigning superpower of the Mediterranean, Carthage. Based in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage was a wealthy maritime empire with a navy that ruled the seas. The 3 Punic Wars that followed were the World Wars of antiquity. So the Second Punic War saw the arrival of Hannibal, a military genius who led an army, including war elephants, across the Alps to strike at Rome's heart. He inflicted the most devastating defeat in Roman history at the Battle of Cannae, but he could never crack the wall of Roman resilience. Led by Scipio Africanus, the Romans took the fight to Africa, defeating Hannibal at Zama. By the end of the Third Punic War in 146 BCE, Carthage was literally wiped off the map, and Rome was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. The death of the Republic. However, Rome's spectacular success abroad created a victory disease at home. The influx of immense wealth and millions of slaves transformed the Roman economy. Small farmers, the traditional backbone of the Roman legions, were driven out of business by massive slave-run estates called latifundia. The gap between the ultra-rich and the desperate poor widened, leading to social unrest and political violence. The late Republic was marked by the rise of powerful warlords who realized that the loyalty of their soldiers was more valuable than the laws of the Senate. Men like Marius and Sulla turned their legions against Rome itself to seize power. In the middle of the 1st century BCE, 3 men formed a secret alliance to control the state. The First Triumvirate, consisting of Pompey the Great, Crassus, and a charismatic politician named Julius Caesar. Caesar's conquest of Gaul, which is now modern France, gave him the wealth and military prestige to challenge the Senate. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River, sparking a civil war that ended with his appointment as dictator for life. Caesar was a brilliant reformer, but his monarchical ambitions terrified the traditional elite. On the Ides of March, 44 BCE, he was assassinated on the floor of the Senate. His death did not save the Republic. It merely plunged it into another round of civil wars. The Pax Romana, the empire at its zenith. The chaos ended with Caesar's great-nephew and heir, Octavian, who defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium. In 27 BCE, Octavian took the title Augustus, becoming the first Roman emperor. While he maintained the facade of the Republic, he held absolute power over the military and the treasury. Augustus ushered in the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, 2 centuries of relative stability and prosperity. During this time, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent under the Emperor Trajan, stretching from the misty hills of northern Britain to the scorching deserts of Mesopotamia. This was the era of the great Roman monuments. Emperors competed to build massive amphitheaters, like the Colosseum, and intricate baths to keep the population entertained and clean. Advanced infrastructure, including over 50,000 miles of paved roads and massive stone aqueducts, allowed for the rapid movement of goods and soldiers and the growth of vibrant urban centers. Life in the Roman world was remarkably sophisticated. Citizens enjoyed a common legal system, a single currency, and a flourishing culture of literature and philosophy. This was the age of Virgil, Horace, and Seneca. However, this prosperity relied on a dark foundation, a massive slave population, and the constant expansion of the frontiers to fuel the Roman economy. The rise of Christianity. In the remote eastern province of Judea, during the reign of Augustus and Tiberius, a new movement began. A Jewish teacher named Jesus of Nazareth began preaching a message of love, humility, and the coming of a divine kingdom. While Jesus was executed by the Roman authorities, his followers, most notably the Apostle Paul, began spreading his teachings throughout the Mediterranean. Initially, the Roman state viewed Christianity as a small, potentially subversive sect. Christians refused to participate in the state cult of the emperor, leading to periods of local and imperial persecution. But the message of the new faith, which offered hope and a sense of community to the poor, the enslaved, and the marginalized, proved incredibly resilient. By the 3rd century, Christianity had grown into a significant minority. In 312 CE, the Emperor Constantine converted to the faith following a vision before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. With the Edict of Milan, he granted religious tolerance to Christians. By the end of the 4th century, under Emperor Theodosius I, Christianity had transitioned from a persecuted cult to the official state religion of the Roman Empire. This alliance between the cross and the eagle would shape the next 1,000 years of European history. The crisis of the 3rd century. By the middle of the 3rd century, the Pax Romana was a distant memory. The empire was hit by a perfect storm of disasters that nearly tore it apart. This period, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, was characterized by hyperinflation, devastating plagues, and constant civil wars. The barracks emperors, military commanders, who were crowned by their troops only to be assassinated months later, weakened the central government. At one point, the empire actually split into 3 separate competing states. Meanwhile, new external threats appeared. In the east, the Sassanid Persians became a formidable rival, while Germanic tribes in the north began launching increasingly daring raids across the Rhine and Danube frontiers. The empire was saved from total collapse by the Emperor Diocletian, who took the throne in 284 CE. He realized the empire was too large to be ruled by one man. He divided it into a tetrarchy, or rule of 4, with 2 senior emperors and 2 juniors. He also massively expanded the bureaucracy and the military, though this required crushing taxes that stifled the economy. The Great Divide, East and West. While Diocletian's reforms provided temporary stability, the cultural and economic divide between the Latin-speaking West and the Greek-speaking East continued to grow. In 330 CE, Constantine moved the imperial capital from Rome to the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople. This new Rome was more defensible, wealthier, and closer to the empire's most important economic and military frontiers. In 395 CE, following the death of Theodosius I, the division became permanent. The Western Roman Empire, ruled from Rome, was increasingly rural, economically fragile, and militarily overstretched. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, remained urban, rich, and centralized. The barbarian migrations and the fall of the West, beyond the Rhine and Danube rivers, the world was on the move. Germanic tribes like the Goths, Vandals, and Franks were being pushed by the arrival of the Huns, a nomadic people from the steppes of Central Asia. These barbarian groups were not just raiders, they were entire peoples seeking land and security within the borders of the empire. The Western Empire, desperate for manpower, began enlisting these Germanic warriors into the Roman army and settling them in the provinces. However, the Romans often mistreated these new arrivals, leading to massive revolts. In 378 CE, the Goths defeated and killed the Eastern Emperor Valens at the Battle of Adrianople, shattering the myth of Roman military invincibility. In 410 CE, for the first time in 800 years, the city of Rome was sacked by the Visigoths under Alaric. The shockwaves were felt across the world. Saint Jerome wrote, "The city which has taken the whole world was itself taken." Britain was abandoned. Gaul and Spain were carved up by Germanic warlords. The end came quietly. In 476 CE, a Germanic leader named Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor, a teenager, ironically named Romulus Augustulus. Odoacer did not claim the imperial title for himself. He sent the imperial regalia back to Constantinople, signaling that the Western Empire was dead. The ancient world had ended, and the Middle Ages, the so-called Dark Ages, had begun. The Byzantine survival and the Justinian dream. While the West fell into fragmentation, the East endured. For the next 1,000 years, the emperors in Constantinople continued to call themselves Romans. The high point of this period was the reign of Justinian I in the 6th century. Supported by his brilliant wife, Empress Theodora, and his talented general Belisarius, Justinian launched an ambitious campaign to reconquer the West. His armies reclaimed North Africa from the Vandals and, after a long and bloody war, took Italy from the Ostrogoths. Justinian also oversaw the codification of Roman law, which remains the basis of legal systems in many modern countries. He built the Hagia Sophia, a massive domed cathedral that was the largest building in the world for centuries. However, Justinian's dream of a restored Roman Empire was short-lived. A devastating plague, known as the Plague of Justinian, killed millions and crippled the Byzantine economy. Shortly after his death, the Lombards invaded Italy, and the Byzantines lost most of their western conquests. The focus of the empire shifted back to the east. While the shadow of Rome, the Carolingian attempt. In the ruins of the West, the Germanic kingdoms began to stabilize. The most successful of these were the Franks in Gaul. Under the Merovingian and later the Carolingian dynasties, they forged a new type of European power. In 732 CE, Charles Martel stopped an Islamic expansion into Europe at the Battle of Tours, securing his family's prestige. His grandson, Charlemagne, was a towering figure who conquered most of Western Europe, from the Pyrenees to the Elbe. On Christmas Day, 800 CE, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans. This was a bold attempt to revive the Roman Empire in the West under a Christian, Germanic king. Charlemagne initiated a Carolingian Renaissance, encouraging literacy and the preservation of Latin texts. However, his empire was built on personal loyalty rather than institutional strength. After his death, the empire was divided among his grandsons and soon disintegrated under the pressure of new invaders, the Vikings, the Magyars, and the Saracens. The Pillars of Rome. Why the ancient world still rules our modern lives. The Roman Empire did not simply vanish in 476 CE. It merely changed state, transitioning from a political entity into the very DNA of Western civilization. We do not just visit Rome's ruins, we inhabit them every single day. To understand the modern world, one must look at the four primary pillars that survived the collapse of the legions. 1. The blueprint of power, government, and law. The Roman Republic provided the skeletal structure for modern democracy. Concepts like checks and balances, the right to veto, and the tiered system of representation were meticulously studied by the Enlightenment thinkers and the American founding fathers. Furthermore, the Corpus Juris Civilis, or the Justinian Code, established the revolutionary principle that the law is a supreme, objective force that sits above any individual ruler. This rule of law is the direct ancestor of modern constitutionalism. 2. The living echo, language and literature. Latin is often called a dead language, but that is a linguistic myth. It simply fractured and evolved into the Romance languages: Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Beyond these direct descendants, Latin remains the international language of science, medicine, and law. Approximately 60% of the English vocabulary is derived from Latin, meaning that every time we speak of justice, liberty, or education, we are speaking Roman. 3. The physical legacy, engineering and urbanism. The Romans were the masters of the true arch and the inventors of waterproof concrete. This allowed them to span rivers and build massive interior spaces like the Pantheon that still stand today. Their vast road network, which once stretched over 50,000 miles, acted as the original internet of the ancient world. Even today, the routes of many major European highways and the locations of cities like London, Paris, and Vienna were determined by Roman surveyors 2,000 years ago. 4. The spiritual shift, religion and ethics. Perhaps the most transformative moment in Roman history was the adoption of Christianity. By providing a centralized, imperial platform for what was once a small Judean sect, Rome ensured its survival and global spread. This Holy Roman synthesis deeply embedded Greco-Roman logic and Christian ethics into the bedrock of Western philosophy, shaping our modern concepts of morality and human rights. The story of Rome is a story of human potential and human failure. It shows how a society can achieve heights of organization and beauty while simultaneously being capable of extreme cruelty and corruption. It is a reminder that no civilization, no matter how glorious, is guaranteed to last forever. As we look at the soaring arches and crumbling columns of the Forum, we are looking at a mirror of our own ambitions and a warning of our own fragility.